Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Just in the Food Entrepreneurs podcast. I'm just Bizzarro. I'm your host. That's Bizzarro. For all of you guys out there, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Justin Bizzarro, and you can find the podcast on Instagram and Facebook as well at Just in the Food Entrepreneurs. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. Obviously, we've changed the format a little bit into a new podcast studio, so that's kind of fun. And with that being said, I have with us today Joe and Paul from Eagles Catch in Iowa. How are you guys doing today?
Very well.
Doing great. Glad to be here in Georgia, and we've got a belly full of fish, and we're ready to roll.
There you go. So, Joe and Paul, tell me a little bit about you guys. I guess Joe first. Tell me about your background, how you became an entrepreneur, why you sort of followed this path, and I know you've had a very interesting journey on the road to where you are in some parts of the world or experiences.
Absolutely. So I was raised on a family farm in Iowa where my dad and my mom, they grew up. I grew up in the same house my mom grew up in, and am actually a fifth generation Iowa farmer. And so we're really proud of that. It's part of our heritage. And what my grandparents and what my great grandparents did, we've had to evolve over the generations to create new opportunities to get with the times and continue to not only grow but continue the whole heritage of being an Iowa farmer for that many generations. And there's so much that is packed in that. But I grew up outside of a town of about 103 people, Buckeye, Iowa. So it's a super small town, and it's one of those kinds of places where you see someone go past your house and you know who it was because of what they drove, and and sometimes they'll honk at you. You know everybody in that community, and so it's such a great place to grow up because you're not just a product of your parents, you're a product of the whole community.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that tied with the heritage, our neighbors are a farming family that knew my grandpa, and they had to do business together, and the generation before that as well worked together as neighbors. And so there's so much that's tied in from a cultural heritage standpoint that is associated with farming from our neck of the woods. And so it's something that we're very, very proud of. And as I grew up, my parents had kind of their own entrepreneurial ventures. They chaired a nonprofit organization. They had an in-home publishing business. My mom actually ran a database, and they did help with cattle sales across the country. And so they were actually doing some of the database and marketing that is probably a more modern approach today. They were doing that in cattle sales 20 years ago, and tracking who was paying for cattle, how much did they pay for them, so that way they could work through the targeted advertising and those kinds of things. And entrepreneurialism is embedded in family-ran agriculture. And so in many cases, there's a big argument. Are farmers entrepreneurs or not? And I think both Paul and I would agree that farmers are entrepreneurs by nature.
Absolutely.
And so part of that is, okay, can I produce something? Can I sell something? And, that's something, and can we make lemons out of lemonade? And that's kind of a funny tie-in to where I kind of got my start in entrepreneurship. And that was as a sophomore in high school. There's a great big bike ride that goes through the state of Iowa called Ragbri.
I'm very familiar with it, actually.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I had a friend whose dad and him did it before his dad passed away, and it was a big deal for him to do it again out there. Hey, Steve, I know you're probably listening in. That's for your dad, and that's kind of interesting. But go on. I love the bike race.
Yeah.
All the way across the state. It's a dedication.
Yeah. And there's like 20,000 people that ride, and they're from all over the world that come to Iowa, of all places, to ride bikes. And so we said, hey, there's an opportunity here. So we did a lemonade stand, the classic, childhood lemonade stand, and we sold lemonade for $2 a glass. And every day we picked up, we moved to a different spot, and in over a week, as a couple college kids slinging $2 a glass lemonade, we made like $2,000 of profit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what was really cool to us was it became this process of learning and refining. So for us, it was about which side of the road do you set your stand on. You want to be at the top of the hill, not at the bottom of the hill. And there's this formula that we had to learn through about how to have a better day of sales of lemonade. And it kind of awoke this beast of entrepreneurialism that, was probably foundationally with where I grew up and how I grew up. But it definitely struck a desire to be, off on my own and working towards my own goals and objectives, and going through this process of learning and applying and learning and applying to get better and better and better, whether it was sales of lemonade for $2 a glass, or whether that's, in this case now we're working towards fish farming. And so that's, and then over time, then we, after college, which I might be a little premature getting into some of the ventures.
Yeah, no, but I want to touch on the awakening the sort of entrepreneurial the spirit in the sophomore in college, and I think similar stories, but again, I grew up on a farm, so I think you're right. It's inherently. I don't know how you pass it on unless you bring your children into your business as an entrepreneur, or encourage them to go work for entrepreneurs, or even a plumber who's just a tradesmith who's running his own business. I gained experience that way too, but before that was more like was fruit stands, and I had and 4 of them, and which side of the road, and where do we place them, and where's the best economic bang for a buck, and there's how do you find the right consumers who are willing to spend that type of money and stop at there instead of your fruit stand. How do you keep them coming back? So one of those things. And then how do you convince them to give you a tip? Because then tips are just free money. Everyone gives away tips. It's the funniest thing. Some people will not pay $7 for like 10 ears of corn, but they'll throw a $3 tip. I'm like, wait a second here. I'm like, but
makes no sense.
But those are the type of things where people can work, people get more inspired, they're making more money on tips as an employee, and therefore they're spending more time with the people, and therefore they'll eventually buy the $7 10-pack of corn or whatever. Hopefully it's not that expensive. If you guys are Mile, I might faint over what I just said. No, but just to use it as a price point. But I think there's a curiosity, and there's something that happens where if you don't follow it, you're constantly wondering, what do I do, or am I actually following my path, or is this what I'm meant to do, or I don't know. I just know if you don't follow that little demon inside, it can terrorize you. Like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Even when life is good, you can feel discontent. So, but anyway, go ahead. So
yeah, and to that point, it was, do I look under this rock or not?
Yeah.
And if I don't look under it, I might have a nice, stable whatever, but it's always going to eat you that you didn't look under the rock.
Yeah.
And for better, for worse in some cases. But and so after college kind of is where my interest got peaked in aquaculture and in fish farming, and for a number of reasons. But in largely that is in macroeconomics why we got interested in it. And so I spent some time in my final throes at Iowa State University, where I did my undergrad, and at that time we had visited a couple fish farms, and it really stuck out to me for a couple reasons. Number one, I didn't want to go and work for somebody. I could probably have a nice career, a nice paycheck, live stably, and all these things.
absolutely.
It sounded boring to me. And so really was just looking for something that I would be able to take on and do myself. And I think I actually made the decision that I was going to chase after this industry. It didn't take much, and I was already convinced, like, yeah, I'm going to spend the next 10, 15 years of my life, 20 years of my life pursuing this. And it really kind of came down to a couple key points. The United States imports 91% of our seafood. Yep. It's the only product, agricultural food product, that's primarily imported versus domestically produced.
Yeah.
And about 50% of what is consumed in the United States is wild caught. And so it is the last agricultural or food product that is predominantly wild caught or harvested. And with that, as you look at those makeups of those two different points of what's imported, about 3/4 of that is coming from China. So in the state of Iowa, we're really good at producing corn, soybeans, hogs, chickens, eggs, just to name a few. We've got a number of commodities that we're really good at producing. We produce
absolutely.
a lot of it. And when you look at that, and there's part of your, we also know that China and Southeast Asia and India are going to represent over 1/3 of the world's population. Their middle class is growing not just in numbers, but in affluence. And so the first thing that those families are going and buying is better nutrition for their family.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we've seen it in the pork and chicken and beef, as well as soy and corn, that they're buying more and more and more of these agricultural products from Iowa, from the United States, as well as many other countries around the world.
Yeah.
But when we get 3/4 of our seafood from China, just China alone, over that 10
It's
to 20...
national security now.
Yes,
also.
it is. And that 10 to 20 year outlook is that we're not going to have the supply of seafood in the United States. And so it was a very bipartisan. Both the Trump and the Obama administration said, both of them said, we need to bring seafood production and capture to the United States, and this is a national security issue.
Absolutely. But I want to pause you there. So, because the gap now that we've got to sort of jump into is you just said all the things you grew in Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
Not one of them was fish.
That's right.
And so you're an Iowa guy in a town of 103 people that was raised by a village. And now you're out of college with no fishing experience, I assume. So how do you go get the fishing experience knowing that you want to be a fisher entrepreneur?
Yeah.
I mean, do you study it? I mean, there's a lot of avenues, but how do you, Joe, go get the experience as an entrepreneur? Because you just didn't tumble your way into the business.
Sure. At that time, there was another fish farm that was close to where we lived. And we very quickly, the two guys that were running it, that were cousins, we very quickly developed a great rapport with them. We very quickly grew to trust them, and we decided we wanted to work with them. And they had a fish farm, they were building a nursery, and we said this could be something really good for the whole statewide. And they were getting a lot of attention for it too, because
Absolutely.
They're a couple hardworking, honest Iowa guys that have a base in farming. And so we said, these are really good guys for us to work with. And I wanted to spend some time learning it on my own.
Yeah.
And so that way, we could help or work with these guys, and we could build an industry here in the state. And so at that time, through multiple contacts, actually got connected with University of Auburn with their fisheries extension department. And a guy by the name of Jesse Chappell, I called him up and he said, yeah, you come right down and I'll take you around to some fish farms, show you a few things. And so here I'm a fresh, college grad out of Iowa State, and I, rent a car for like the first time in my life, coming out of Atlanta airport, and drove down to Auburn and spent some time with him. He took me to a couple different operations, actually a few of them, Willard Poe, who we even work with today, and he, taught me a few things, got me a base knowledge, got me to know a few producers in Southeast, where in the United States it's really the Southeast which produces most of U.S. aquaculture today. A lot of catfish farms and those kinds of things. And so I actually went back, and at this time I was driving this like beat up Buick that we'd bought out of a hail sale, so it looks like a golf ball, and I'm driving this down to Alabama, and I actually went and worked on these farms. And I said, I'll work for free, and I just want to learn. I'll do your dirtiest, greasiest jobs that nobody wants to do. Just teach me.
Yeah.
And so they were so receptive, and we're like, well, free labor, heck, why not? And I'm the month of July.
Yeah.
And I'm in Alabama, like living in a tent my air conditioning goes out in my beat up Buick, and I'm working on these fish farms, and it was an incredible experience, and learned so much from that whole process. Not enough to make me an expert, but it was enough for me to understand some of the similarities between what we do in traditional commoditized agriculture in Iowa and what the opportunities were within fish farming. And with this kind of base knowledge or understanding, at least, I came back and built a business plan for a business that we called Buckeye Fish Company. And at that point, decided to jump in this, and we were going to work with that other farm that was local to us and with those guys. And that was kind of the tipping off point. And at that time, I'd met with a couple other people that we knew that were kind of kicking around this idea of getting involved in aquaculture, and we just kind of sat down at the table and said, well, if you guys kind of want to do this and we kind of want to do this, why don't we work together?
Yeah.
And I've already spent the time working on fish farms in the South, and have dedicated my after college experience to trying to learn this industry. And at that point they kind of said, yeah, let's work together. And this is kind of when Paul came to the picture too, and we started at that time Buckeye Fish Company.
Yeah, so Paul, tell us about your background and sort of where you come into the picture, but give us all the way back. Yeah, obviously you have a farming background as well, so let's just start at the beginning.
Yeah, so it's not a lot different than Joe as far as in the beginning. Grew up on a family farm. I'm third generation farmer. My parents' main source of income came off the farm as I was growing up. We had row crop with corn and soybeans and alfalfa. We also went on the livestock side with registered Suffolk sheep and some 4-H cows, and then some hogs farrow to finish. So we were very diversified. I have two other brothers that we got to walk beans in the summer, bale hay, do all the chores, go through 4-H, growing up showing livestock, learning that entrepreneurial, can you buy an animal, raise it up, sell it for a profit?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was, like when Joe was talking about his build for entrepreneurship, I think that was kind of the start for me. I enjoyed that portion with our registered Suffolk sheep. We had the ability to sell seed stock, so we were selling rams and ewes to producers to have them produce other lambs.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we were the marketing side of things came in a little bit that way, where you had people come look at your animals, you had to sell your animals to them. So I enjoyed that portion of talking to people and getting to know people that way. When I went into the college realm, I also went to Iowa State University, graduated there. I played on the football team. And another jump, I guess, as far as my entrepreneur side was, I was a walk-on. So I didn't get a scholarship, but, goals and pushing forward to, getting that scholarship, and then pushing for, playing time and stuff, that also fed that fire.
Exactly.
To want to be better, to want to, outperform somebody else, to be able to, just make it.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a big portion of entrepreneurship is you want to make it. You want to do, what's best for yourself. And so, after college, I married my high school sweetheart, Shannon, and so she had 2 years of college left, so she went into physical therapy school. We moved to a different part of the state where I started my career in sales. So I was in the livestock feed sales side of things.
Absolutely, yeah.
We went ahead and I stayed in livestock, mainly the swine side of sales, for the next 23 years. As Shannon and I grew our family, after the 2 years that we were over east, we moved back home to Radcliffe, which we were just south of where Joe grew up. And we built our family and started building our own family farm. And I think that's where we kind of, Joe and I avenues changed a little bit,
Yeah.
I'd say. With my family, I have a yearning to bring my kids back into the agriculture aspect or the entrepreneur aspect.
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
things. And the great thing, growing up in the village that Joe and I grew up in, really close, everybody knows everybody, and it's no different than what Joe and I have. We went ahead and going back to my father, he was Joe's mom's 4-H leader.
Yeah.
When I was in 4-H, Joe's parents were my 4-H leaders.
Yeah, there you go.
And then when Joe was finally in 4-H, I sold him sheep that he showed at the county fair. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of connection there that grew our respect for each other and our knowledge for what we can bring for each other.
Well, and I think part of the thing here is even the animals and everything, you're taking something of some value and you're making it worth a greater value, or whether it's a lemon and a lemonade or a fruit and vegetable, and you're getting it to where it's more convenient for someone to purchase it. It's about how do you do that, and it's something I feel that we really need to base as a learning, even if you're not an entrepreneur, just because how else do you take care of yourself? I'm like, it doesn't occur to me any other way not to be an entrepreneur, not to take life into my own hands, and not to try to make my own way and make more value out of it. Because I think, to your point, how could I go into an office and just sit there and do something, and what value am I driving actually? I guess people can see that in their thing, but it's not the same value that I see holistically. And what you're trying to say is, how do I make a bigger difference? What does that look like? How do I provide a better, secure food source? And then how do, I find the right people to do that with?
Yeah.
And we would, on my side of things, when I got into the sales, it wasn't sit on the desk and just type away at the computer. I was calling on
Yeah.
customers, but at the same time, I didn't. It was a paycheck, and I got the ability through livestock to be able to, we got into registered Red Angus cattle and registered Suffolk sheep. My two brothers and I started Touchdown Acres, which we sold club lambs. So we tried to build that community of entrepreneurship, and what can we do to increase value. And I got a cousin and myself and an aunt that built 3 hog barns together. So the diversification
Yeah.
is runs great in our bloods, and we try to expand that in at least for myself, try to expand that into my kids.
There's I was gonna pull something out, and just a funny quote that Paul said that made me think of. But there's no more addictive thing than a steady paycheck.
Yeah.
But I wanted to pull something out and reiterate something Paul said, and it's really around the heritage. And Paul talks about giving an opportunity for his
Yeah.
kids to have something that they could come home to. And both Paul and I are, I think 3rd generation Iowa farmer, 5th generation Iowa farmer. This is really driven around heritage and continuing our way of life in rural Iowa that is, similar to a lot of rural places across the country. And, there's this constant urbanization that, a lot of young people go to the cities and those kinds of things. But we're kind of at an inflection point within even the Iowa community where the average age of an Iowa farmer is 57.4 years old, and it's getting older. And they're trying to find ways for the next generation to come home, because it's almost impossible to buy your way into farming. You almost have to be born into it, not
Yeah.
just from a financial sense, because there's a lot of costs.
Yeah, so
being
anyone
started.
knows the combine that puts the corn on the table. I mean, it's a supercar, $1 million minimum usually,
Yep.
starting off. And so when people look at farmers and don't think entrepreneurs, they've got lines sometimes of these multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment that they've figured out how to finance and pay for and turn into profitable ventures to support their family. But go ahead.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly right. And there's so much that goes into getting started in farming. And since so much of it is heritage driven, that it is a profession that is handed down and inherited. And there's a lot of personal and social responsibility around that. And that's part of the reason why we decided to get in this business as well, is providing sort of new opportunities, economic opportunities for that next generation to come home, as well as, you know, Paul's next generation. I don't have a next generation yet, but that's something that we think a lot about in trying to continue that heritage.
I think it's pretty cool. So let's dive into Buckeye Fish
Yeah.
Company now. I mean, I know we're talking about Eagles Catch ultimately, but let's dive into that, how you guys meet, where that takes you, the type of fish you guys grow. And I also want to talk about a little bit about the other fish you've grown in your experience while you were in Alabama or wherever, just over the years, if you guys have experience in that. Because I want to talk not only about a specific fish, but I want to talk about the diversification, because I really think the major point here is also there was once a free cow. You know, but we figured out how to make them grass-finished cows. So we're at a point where the technology's there. We can make and grow agriculture, you know, through aquaculture, and make it like our normal food sources safely and produce it in fine ways that replicate the environments in order to provide a safe, local, sustainable source. Yeah. You know, which is interesting, and I just want to point this out also, is while everyone in the United States are on this big local, sustainable, you know, get everything plant-based, whatever, we were kind of being at a hypocrisy in the way we shop, because while we shop and we're saying we want all these things and we do this, we're also buying fish, like you said, from other places. We're also buying stuff that's not locally sourced, that's processed overseas, for example. So what is it that we're really trying to do? Okay, fine, let's pretend it's not about national security. Let's pretend it's just about security of a food source as human existence. Like, at some point, we need to figure out how to holistically do it all, and make it so we can do without wasting the water and all of that, which we'll get more into, I think. But let's talk about Buckeye Fish Company.
Yeah. So, as Joe was talking about, there was a core of himself and another farm family close to our neck of the woods. And I guess on my story, we had Iowa Soybean Digest is the Iowa Soybean Association puts out a newsletter every quarter, I think it is. And I was reading that, and it had the article of Iowa's first fish farm, called Iowa's First, and that was the Nelson, the cousins that Joe was talking about previously, and talking about, you know, interested in cooperating with other farmers to raise their fish. And you know, the farm that I live on has an old turkey building on it, which we use for sheep. But I thought to myself, this would be a great experience for my kids to be able to maybe put a couple tanks in this building and raise fish for these guys and sell them cooperatively. And this is going to be wonderful. I'll be able to satisfy our own fish needs and get my kids into something. And I was very naive at that time on how fish farming actually worked, because literally that was my first induction into fish farming.
Yeah.
So I was naive, but I started asking some questions, talking to Iowa State Extension. I told my younger brother about it, and that I was like, hey, I'm really interested in this. I've been talking to the Nelson brother or cousins, and he was at a bull sale, which Joe's dad, our 4-H leader, was at managing the sale, and they got talking, and Jim, my brother, told Dave, Joe's dad, Paul's got this crazy idea about becoming a fish farmer.
Yeah.
And Dave's like, well, that's interesting because Joe's going to do it. And so, long story short, Jim told me to reach out to Joe and just see what it's about, see if I could be part of it. And I told my wife the other day, I was like, that was probably my best sales job of my life, was sitting at the table with Joe and the Plagueys, the other farm family, asking them, selling them on getting into the business with them. And they were pretty set on, they had an idea where they wanted to go. And Joe was very adamant about, well, let us get this off the ground, and when we're ready to expand, then that would be a good time for you to come in. And I was very adamant about, no, if I'm going to do this, I want to do this on the ground floor.
Yeah.
Versus, okay, well, now it's going, now it's costing me this much more to get in.
Yeah.
And so, Joe and the Plagueys were very grateful enough to allow me the opportunity, myself and another partner that I had, to own a quarter of it. And then we brought in another farm family. And so we just doubled the facility. And luckily that was my opportunity to get into fish farming. I still had a full-time, other job. So this was my nights and weekends position. But it was something that, really, blew up my interest and passion for entrepreneurship and moving forward with it.
And what kind of fish? I mean, how did you decide what to fish to start with at this point?
Yeah, so at that point we were working with that other farm and those cousins that had gotten involved, and they had the nursery and they were getting the whole setup. So we were like, well, we'll just work with you. What you guys do, we'll do. And we thought that was a great opportunity. So at that point we were raising barramundi sea bass, which is a fish native to Australia. And it's, one that is extremely nutritious and has all these really great values. It's a high yielding fish. And there's some complexities around the production, but that was all stuff workable, and we had the local supply. We had someone locally that we could market with, and those kinds of things. And I also want to kind of pull out something Paul said too about the whole diversification piece. And as you look at the state of Iowa, all of these farmers are diversified, and if you're not diversified, you've probably gone out of business, because any one of these commodities will ebb and flow.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so if you're in pork production, well, you also need to be in corn production, and you need to be in soybean production, because as these things ebb and flow, they've got to offset each other.
Exactly.
And even if you look at the last 70 years, farmers have basically broken even. And so there's it's almost now, if you've made it this far, it's part of your cultural identity of trying to diversify. And so that was part of Paul, and Paul was one of the more progressive ones at saying, oh, hey, here's another opportunity in fish farming. And because it's not just diversification from a product standpoint, but it's also diversification from a geographical distribution perspective, because a lot of our other commodities are dependent on international trade agreements to be successful. These are products that are going to go to our neighbors.
Yeah.
And the people in the Midwest, and then eventually, probably the coastlines. And so I think is really cool too.
And I think it's a major point. I think any farmers that are actually starting to make money anyway in any business now are having to diversify or think about rotating and on a grander scheme. And, you think about it, beef and pork, but also crops and whatever. I mean, at some point you're having to manage it all for exactly that reason. And you become really good at a lot of different things. Yeah. And it's really unfortunate when we try to break apart those silos of those industries and vilify one against the other, because what we don't realize is that a lot of farmers rely on all of it. They rely on the pig, the cow, and the chicken.
They all work together.
And the turkey.
Yep.
And so, holistically, if we really think about it in the way we purchase or the way we do things, to your point, it's about the fishing, it's about the sheep, it's about the pig, but it's also about the corn, the soy, the tomatoes, the cucumbers, whatever that also is in the mix along with it. And then let's talk about environmentally, you're using less water, so you're doing that, but also, to your point, geographically, the fish are there, and you're providing the Midwest with another protein source, which is essential for the diversification of the human diet. And you're providing it locally and in a way that doesn't have much of a carbon footprint, considering the way it's done if you catch it at sea. Right. Okay, it's on a ship. It's then shipped from a sit to a mainland, then from a mainland on another ship across the sea to the United States, and then the United States shipped across the country. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit doesn't make sense, and it's the same reason, one of the reasons FSP is we've gotten into vertical integration, why we have the gestation of our pigs in Iowa. It's the best place. Where are the best farmers that have it? Who are the ones understanding the technologies of, Proposition 12 for California? Ironically, it's Iowa. It's not California. Iowa's leading the charge on understanding, the clean air barns and the, what does that look like? And so it's interesting that, yes, California sets the rules or New York City sets these rules, but at the end of the day, the entrepreneurial farmers that adjust the quickest in the country are the ones who benefit. In Iowa, smack in the middle, entrepreneurially, they can go both ways to a coast, and you think it's at a disadvantage because of the ports. But really, there's somewhat of an advantage there that's happened because of the small communities and the diversification that you guys have had that allow food to travel better, and to get rid of it or to not realize the benefits that we have in farming and encouraging generational farming to keep going, or not getting rid of land for development, housing. We're not weighing whether it's farmable land we should be keeping or whether it's just land doesn't matter and it should be a development. We don't look at that.
No.
It's terrible.
Yeah, one of the untold success stories of the modernization of agricultural practices, and a lot of people demonize what they'll call factory farming. Exactly. And those kinds of things, but as you look at the last 50 years, we've decreased the carbon footprint by a single unit of whatever commodity threefold. Also, over the last 20 to 30 years, we've cut world hunger in half. And so in the World Food Prize, if you're not familiar with a gentleman by the name of Norman Borlaug, originally an Iowa native, Nobel Peace Prize winner, credited with saving over 1 billion lives, and is also considered the father of the Green Revolution, was part of this, a founder of this World Food Prize, which is headquartered in Iowa. Their big event is always in Iowa, and it attracts the Bill Gates Foundation and several big players.
Absolutely.
The modernization of this food supply and commoditization of these agricultural products. I've heard people criticize that maybe flavor has gone down with some of these products, but the trade-off is a lower carbon footprint. The trade-off is we're now by 2050, we're going to have to produce twice the amount of agricultural product with less land, less water, and less inputs.
Exactly.
And so with us looking at these things from the lens of fish farming, we're saying, hey, fish are an incredibly efficient animal.
Yeah.
They convert about 1.3 pounds of feed for a pound in return. At least our tilapia do. And so they're incredibly efficient at converting this protein and into usable and nutritious protein. So different products or different animals are a lot of them are less efficient, but fish really set the trend for efficient protein. And then on top of that, in the state of Iowa, we got all the feedstuffs.
Yeah.
Byproducts from other animal protein production, the grains, the roughages, any sort of cellulistic or amylistic energy that needs to go into this. We're in the center of not just the country, but the center of the world when it comes to efficient commoditization of these products.
Absolutely.
And so on top of that, Iowa also leads the country in renewable energy, being with over 40% of our electricity is coming from wind energy. And we're also the #1 ethanol producer in the country. And so we are the center of the world when it comes to renewable energies and efficient protein production. And so on top of being where the feedstuffs are, we're working to, over time, to vertically integrate there locally, utilize the feedstuffs that are just down the road from us, mill it, and process everything there. We can get that transportation down, which is one of the biggest carbon emissions, is going to be on the transportation side. And then on top of that, we're going to be able to do it with electricity that's like almost 50%.
It's starting to get lower.
This is the center of the world when it comes to innovation in this space.
And the massive roofs you guys have, it's only probably a matter of time before solar panels and stuff. Although you have open roofs, I don't know how the fishing works, but I gotta imagine that there's probably plans for that down the road.
Yeah.
But let's get back to the Buckeye fish.
Yeah.
But actually, I think what we'll do is we'll go into the part 2. And so thank you guys for joining us. So we're gonna have these guys back for episode 2. With them, and we'll start to get into Buckeye Fish Company and really how you guys get into Eagles Catch. So thank you guys for joining us. But as we get off the episode, will you tell us where we can find Eagles Catch online and Instagram and Facebook and things like that, website?
Yep. www.eagles-catch.com is our website, and you can find us on Facebook at Eagles-Catch.
Awesome. Thank you guys very much. Thank you, everyone, for listening in, and enjoy your Wednesdays, and thank you.
Thank you.